neocortex that are dealing with humor and art and irony and satire and so forth are using the same hierarchical mechanisms as all the other regions of the neocortex. And that's why we see this tremendous plasticity. It's not that there's sort of simple functions that can recognize curves and lines and edges, and then very complex structures that can deal with, you know, art and music. It's the same capability. Now, we uniquely are able to deal with these types of structures of art and science because we have more neocortex. It was a quantitative extension. We have about 300 million of these pattern recognizers, a lot more than the other primates. And that allowed for this qualitative change and the kinds of things we're capable of thinking of. That being said, 300 million is actually not quite enough. We'd like to extend it and think even bigger thoughts and create even new qualitative changes. Why not a billion or a trillion little pattern recognizers in the neocortex? And so those the extensions, we're not going to stuff them in our brains. They'll be out in the cloud. We can back them up. There'd be many benefits.
I do. I like the idea of backing up consciousness. I want to stand this for 1 second, just because when I think about my phone and the way I interact with my phone, and this may put me on the sort of slightly Luddite end of this room, I have very ambivalent feelings about my smartphone. And like probably a lot of people here, whom I have observed, over the course of this conference, I spend a lot of time shuffling down the street, hunched over my phone, and I'm drawing on huge amounts of information that are stored elsewhere and interacting with people who are somewhere else out there in the cloud. But I feel as though my experience of reality around me, and possibly my experience of the people around me, is correspondingly impoverished. It all starts to feel a little bit zero-sum. And I guess my question to you is, how confident do you feel that we're not giving things up as we accept this technology into our minds and into our bodies?
You've decided to go without any technology now for the future.
Well, I can't. This is a good question. And I will say, just because I can't stop doing it, doesn't mean that it's good for me.
Yeah, I mean, Sherry Turkle has written about these disadvantages. I remember there was a big controversy that kids weren't going to learn arithmetic when the calculators came out when I went to college. And in fact, kids don't learn arithmetic. The calculators haven't gone away. We have outsourced a lot of our personal, historical, social, cultural memories to the cloud and all the devices we use to access it. I think fundamentally it's a good thing in that it frees up what limited neocortex we have for more creative endeavors, which you can certainly see at this conference. I think actually we should reorganize education to teach kids by doing, have them actually do projects. If I think about what I managed to remember and learn, it's from the projects I did. We see young people doing things, but they're not given enough freedom to do it. And there are resources you could bring to bear, like mentors. So is there something lost? I think, you really are in control. Time triage is one of the most important decisions we make every moment of our lives, what you choose to do. If you're on your phone or whatever, how you interact with the cloud, that's your own decision. You really can organize it the way you want. So people say, oh, well, people aren't as in touch with reality. I mean, it's reality out there too. You're communicating with other people through these, and either directly through real-time social network communication, or indirectly by reading things that have been written by other people, from literary works to instant messages. But you can decide how you're going to balance your time, and maybe that gets out of whack, but I think basically it has expanded our minds, and we still have a 19th century model of education I think we should actually rely on this and teach kids how to solve problems, including the problems of the world, which high school kids and junior high school kids can actually contribute to.
I'm going to change gears for a second and bring up that Paul Allen essay. Some of you may have seen this a couple months ago. Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, published an essay called The Singularity is Not Near. One of the points he brought up was the law. He had a criticism of the law of accelerated returns. He argued that that law is a phenomenon that we have observed in the past, but because it's not physical law, it's one of those things, as he puts it, that works until it doesn't. How much can we rely on it? How confident can we be that, for example, Moore's law, well, simply hit a wall, and then everything will level off? Could it not just all stop?
Well, what I wrote was two things. First of all, most laws of science are not physical laws. They're based on the emergent properties of some lower level. Take, for example, thermodynamics, which predicts the future properties of a gas. And it actually does that by modeling all the particles as following a random walk. So by definition, it's completely unpredictable where this particle will be in 10 seconds. Yet by the laws, and they're considered scientific laws of thermodynamics, you can predict the overall properties of the gas to a very high degree of precision. And the law of accelerating returns actually uses the same kind of mathematics. Now, when Paul Allen says it works until it doesn't, he's confusing a specific paradigm with the overall law of accelerating returns. So there was a phenomenon where they were making vacuum tubes smaller and smaller, as I mentioned earlier, and that worked until it didn't. But as the end was near of that paradigm, it created research pressure to create the next method, which was transistors, and then the method after that was chips and Moore's law. Moore's law was not the first, but the fifth paradigm to bring exponential growth of computing. This exponential growth of computing goes back decades before Gordon Moore was even born. And yes, Moore's law will come to an end. Gordon Moore said 2002, Intel now says 2022. By that time, the key features will be about 30 carbon atoms in width, and we won't be able to shrink them anymore. We'll then go to the sixth paradigm, which if you speak to Justin Ratner, the CTO of Intel, will show you in his lab these circuits working already, which are three-dimensional computing. And at first, actually, three-dimensional chips have already come out. And that will keep this law of accelerating returns going for a long time. So I have an analysis of how long that can actually go with the sixth paradigm. It would be to a point where these technologies are trillions of times more powerful than the human brain at very low cost, which is why I think our brain extenders will be where the action is, just based on that sixth paradigm.
Has it been wrong? I mean, you've been tracking the curve for some time. Have there been things that you have predicted that have not come to pass?
Well, in terms of just predicting these basic underlying properties, such as price performance and capacity of different information technologies, they have progressed, and they go way back. In the case of computing, it's from 1890, and as I mentioned, I plotted that curve in 1981, and we're very much on that curve. I wrote predictions based on implications, social and product implications. Those are less predictable. I did an analysis, a 150-page analysis of the 147 predictions I made in the Age of Squishy Machines, which I wrote in the mid to late 1990s, about 2009. 86% were correct. 14% were I marked incorrect. I was fairly strict about it. So, for example, there will be self-driving cars. I marked as wrong. They're not ubiquitous, but the technology does exist. The Google cars have been driven 200,000 miles without drivers. So I have a pretty good track record. The ones that are wrong tend to be ones like driverless cars, which are not just measuring the fundamental properties like instructions per second per dollar, things like that.
Second and last Paul Allen related question. He talked a lot about the complexity of the brain. And 2 years ago, I was at the Singularity Summit, and I saw a very compelling presentation by the Cambridge neuroscientist Dennis Bray, where he talked about the kind of just dizzying, boggling number of different states and configurations that a single cell can take on as a way to encode information. And it's impressive. And sort of along those lines, Alan makes the argument that with existing / foreseeable future technology, hardware and software, it's just not feasible to understand what's going on inside a brain, and then secondarily to emulate it in silicon.
Well, there are 4 million quotations that Google will give you on the complexity of the brain. Okay? But I didn't contribute to that in this new book. Not that I'm saying it's simple. However, I mean, in that article, Paul Allen says every single structure and connection is there because of millions of years of evolution. It's there precisely because of what evolution has learned through millions of years. That cannot possibly be true, because there are 100 trillion connections. That would mean there would be hundreds of trillions or quadrillions of bytes of design information. Where is that design information? The design of the initial state of the brain is in the genome. I have a whole analysis of this, but there's only 25 billion bytes of design information for the brain in the genome. That's not simple, but that couldn't possibly describe every single connection. How does that happen? It's through massive redundancy. You have 300 million structures in the neocortex, which recognize a pattern and remember a pattern. They're organized in hierarchies, but that hierarchy is not specified in the design. It comes about entirely from our own experience. So what we actually choose to learn and interact with, the people we know, we are creating right now as we sit here, new connections in our neocortex. And the complexity of it is quite manageable. I mean, that's a level of complexity that's quite in keeping with our advanced software systems. And I'd actually describe how that mechanism, which is repeated several million times in the neocortex, works, provide the evidence for it. So if you look at something and you don't quite understand it, and you see this incredible mass tangle of connections, and assume every connection is placed there by evolution based on its intelligent process, what it has done is create a very clever system that can wire itself based on its own experience. In the cerebellum, there's a mechanism repeated 10 billion times, and again, it is self-wiring. And there's massive redundancy. It's a level of complexity we can understand. It's kind of losing the forest with the trees and the branches and the veins in the branches. You could say the forest is incredibly complex too, but in fact there's a lot of fractal variability. You could say a tree is actually more complex than a forest. The actual information processing in the brain is understandable, and it is becoming revealed, and we are scaling up simulations based on these functional understandings of how the mechanisms work.
Just 5-minute warning. We're going to go to your questions. We've got 5 minutes on the clock. I want to repeat something that a fairly famous science fiction writer once said to me. I was talking to him about some of your ideas in the Singularity. He said that he agreed with almost all of your predictions about the future and how things were going to play out, with the caveat that he thought that the first immortal being on Earth was going to be a Mexican drug lord, and the second immortal being on Earth would be that Mexican drug lord's lieutenant, and that everybody else was going to have to pay. And I guess my question to you is, how confident do you feel that the kinds of marvelous AI-driven technological benefits that are on their way, how confident are you that they will be available to the 99%?
Well, you have to take a lot of comfort from how we've done so far, and I think where we are today is actually a good measure for a lot of these issues. 20 years ago, if you took out a mobile phone in a movie, that was a signal that this is a Mexican drug lord, or some other very wealthy person of the power elite. And they didn't work very well, and he didn't take it out of his pocket because it's big and heavy. Maybe it made phone calls poorly. Now that they do a million things, according to the Apple ads, they are very widespread and ubiquitous. There's 6 billion cell phones, about 1 billion of them are smartphones. Google projects 6 billion smartphones within 3 years. It really is in everybody's hands, and there's tremendous power that everybody has to create, thousands of companies as represented here, and not just technological companies. I was at the music conference, National Association of Music Merchants, and it's like a computer conference with all the sophisticated gear to create music. Same thing for graphic arts or for library science. Every field is being empowered by these increasingly inexpensive yet very powerful tools. And in my view, that's part of who we are. We are the human-machine civilization. We create these tools to extend our reach. Ever since we picked up a stick to reach a higher branch, we extended our reach. And I think they will make their ways into our bodies and brains, but I think that's an arbitrary distinction. They are getting smaller. We're going to be more and more integrated with them. That's not to say there aren't dangers, but I actually don't see tremendous additional power being given to a small elite over the tremendous power that's in everybody's hands.
All right, last question. We've got 2 minutes until the Q&A. Say, there's so much change on the way. We're at this moment of such great volatility and flux. Say you're graduated from college right now. Where would you want to put yourself? What would you want to do to get yourself ready for the decades that are about to come?
Well, I touched on this before, and I think all of our schools, from elementary school on up, need to bring learn from doing into the curriculum, and not as some after-school extracurricular program, but as a mainstay of education. I started Singularity University with Peter Diamandis and the X Prize Foundation, support from Google and NASA, and entrepreneurship, starting projects to address world problems is the centerpiece of the curriculum. So if I were a student, I would make sure I was able to do that and was at an institution that supported that. It would provide both the time and the recognition and the mentorship to support that kind of thing. I think that is how education should work. Even if your project doesn't succeed, you'll learn a lot. It's the best way to learn, where you have a passion for some end result, and suddenly you realize, oh, I never realized math was that powerful. You can actually accomplish, this mission I have for humanity with math, as opposed to just being this kind of boring subject. So, as a student, I would seek that out. As someone interested in education, I try to foster that. My family's been actually involved in education since 1868, when my great-grandmother started the first school in Europe to provide higher education for girls. So that's my view.
Great. I think we're ready to go to the mic. All right, let's go to the mic. I will sit here quietly, and Ray is all yours.
Great. My name is Michael Wang. I head up innovation at Georgetown University. The talk that you guys had struck a chord because yesterday my iPhone died, and out of sheer terror I tried to hack it a little bit. So I got my little Kodak fun saver and made a little contact list, and then I realized, I didn't really need this. I realized sort of the connectivity that I was craving, I found in the people around me. So I kind of marinated on that while you guys were talking. My question is, back to education, what are maybe 3 areas that you say, from an implementation standpoint, sort of pairing innovation with implementation, that we can, implement at universities, knowing that we've been learning kind of the same way we have been for hundreds, even thousands of years, sort of looking at, is it competency, not looking at credits and courses. So what are 3 things that you might say are actionable?
Well, first of all, in terms of fields of study, every area is relevant. So it's not that people have to be a computer scientist. The arts create knowledge, which is at the very top of our conceptual hierarchy and has also been amplified by technology. That being said, I think it's actually important for people to be computer literate, not just in using these devices, but actually understanding how computers work, even if you're primarily interested in the humanities as part of our current world. In terms of subject areas that are amenable to learn by doing, I mean, biology now, you don't have to have multi-million-dollar labs with actually very inexpensive equipment. You can do things like synthetic biology and other aspects of biotechnology. I think virtual reality and augmented reality is going to become part of our lives. Google's coming out with these augmented reality glasses. Whether that product succeeds or not is hard to say, but that's going to be reality. Because devices are getting smaller and smaller, but people don't want to just look at a tiny screen, so why not this big screen that we can see all the time? That's going to be our display. We're going to increasingly interact in a fluid way without carrying around objects. The tools to create virtual realities and augmented reality is in everybody's hands. Just creating applications. The design tools are inexpensive. And people can then create applications that may relate to some other interest they have, which can be anything.
Hi, my name is Anil from KCRW. My question has to do with, well, thank you first of all for the super optimistic view of the world. I think it's amazing. My question has to do with the...
mention a few problems.
My question has to do with the promise versus peril reality of technology. Does there exist, or should there exist, a moral code for people like the engineers and the scientists and the technologists that are harnessing these technologies to increase the promise and diminish the peril?
Absolutely. So 30 years ago, the potential abuse of biotechnology was recognized. There was a conference, the Asilomar Conference, to talk about it, and they came up with guidelines. So these guidelines have now been refined, and many of them are baked into law. These are guidelines for how to safely practice biotechnology, and any responsible practitioner knows them very well and follows them, and they've been very effective. There have been no significant accidents in biotechnology over the last 3 decades. So that is absolutely part of any program to protect against the downsides. There's a set of similar guidelines based on the Asilomar guidelines for nanotech, which isn't quite feasible yet in terms of self-replication, but that discussion's already underway. AI, a little more complicated, but there's discussions of similar ethical standards. In addition, you need to protect yourself against people who are not going to follow the ethical standards intentionally for whatever ideological reason. So actually, I started working with the Army, which is the agency in the United States responsible for bioterrorism protection, about 15 years ago. And when I got there, they gave me a tour, and they said, well, here's our section that deals with anthrax, and here's our section that deals with smallpox. We've got some great smallpox samples. Would you like to see them? And I said, that's okay, so much time. And I said, what about dealing with a brand new virus you've never seen before that was created in a lab? And they said, oh, is that possible? So that was 15 years ago. Today, there is a rapid response system in place which will sequence a virus in a day. Another example of acceleration, because it took 5 years to sequence HIV, 31 days to sequence SARS. We can now sequence a virus in a day, create an RNA to turn to medication. I don't have time to describe the whole technique, but within days, a response could be developed. We had a big discussion, what about the FDA? That can take months to go through approval. The Army decided we don't need to go through the FDA. So, unfortunately, all of you do have to go through the FDA. But at any rate, those are the 2 main components. It's not a pat answer. I think this is the major challenge we have in the decades ahead.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, I'm Bob Sally. I'm curious to see or to know what you think how psychology and sociology is going to have to evolve or simplify as our life expectancies increase.
Well, we actually get used to these things very quickly. Social structures are changing. So I think sociology and psychology have an important role to actually track how society is changed by these technologies. People are already living longer and being productive longer. And it brings up a whole issue of resources, which you could spend a whole hour or a whole conference on. There's a good book by my co-founder of Singularity University, Peter Diamandis, called Abundance, which talks about how we're applying these same technologies I'm talking about to increase resources. We have 10,000 times more sunlight than we need, for example, to meet 100% of our energy needs, and the production of solar energy is doubling every year, 2 years. It's on an exponential rise. But it is changing psychological patterns. People can create communities now all around the world based on their common interests and concerns. So certainly politics has already dramatically changed. But as we basically literally change our minds and our brains, which I think we've already done, and that's going to continue at an exponential pace, examining the social and psychological impact is important. Then there will be issues that come up that are short of existential risks, things like privacy, and things like enabling bullying, which is a big issue now online, that we need psychologists to deal with.
Last question.
No pressure. Ray, I saw you, my name's Adam Lavelle. I saw you speak 2 years ago, and you were talking about how I could take a nanotech device, also known as a pill, and reconfigure my lungs to give me Olympic capacity, lung capacity. Just wanted you to talk about that for a second, and the tail end of that is there something I should be putting in my body other than what I've been putting in it here at South by that you would recommend? Thanks.
Could I have a list of those? You're referring to a design for a robotic red blood cell. I alluded to that very quickly, the ability to have nanobots in your bloodstream to keep you healthier. That particular one was designed by Ron Friedis and brings up an interesting observation about biology, which is that these robotic devices would be about 1,000 times more powerful than your normal red blood cells. So if you were to replace a portion of your red blood cells with these devices, you could do an Olympic sprint for 15 minutes without taking a breath, or sit at the bottom of the pool for 4 hours. So, honey, I'm in the pool will take on a whole new significance. ESPN said, we're going to ban these, right? I said, I don't think we should, and I don't think we will. We should ban steroids because they're bad for your health. These are actually good for your health. So those are off about 20 years in the future. What you should do now is what we call Bridge 1. I've written 3 health books, and we talk, my co-author and I talk about 3 bridges to radical life extension. Bridge 1 is what you can do right now. In order to get to Bridge 2, which is the full flowering of biotechnology, being able to reprogram the information processes underlying biology, that's really only about 15 years away, and it's already rolling out. For example, my father died of heart failure because his heart was damaged from a heart attack. Today, if you damage your heart in a heart attack, which half of all heart attack survivors have this condition, you can fix that with stem cell treatment. So these are actually rolling out already, but they'll be fully mature in 15 years. So we want to get from here to there in good shape. You know, if you're 20-something in good health, then I'd suggest you stay in good health and wear your seatbelt, avoid maybe the most extreme of sports. If you're a baby boomer like myself, my books are really a wake-up call to that generation. You can be in good shape in 15 years, but it requires a little more concerted effort. And so, again, it would be a long discussion as to what to do, but between nutrition and exercise and stress management and some supplements, depending on what your conditions are, you can be in good shape 15 years from now. And Bridge 2 will bring us to Bridge 3 and maybe another decade out of things like nanobots
in your bloodstream, keeping you healthy from inside. I used to call that the killer app, but